Autokinesis. This audiobook was created for your enjoyment and pleasure, and I appreciate your purchasing it. If you like it half as much as I liked writing it, then I've accomplished my purpose. I'm not going to give you a bunch of rules about having to purchase another one for your friends, etc. If you like it, tell your friends and let them borrow it. Share the wealth and leave me your reviews. Come on, I can take it. You can check out all my work at Amazon by simply typing in the word Afobos in the search bar. That's Afobos. This audiobook is published by Afobos, copyright 2012. All rights are reserved. Chapter 1. Reflections. Mark had always known he didn't fit in. He knew he was different, and had been told so on many occasions. Thinking back now, he wondered if his life might have been different if no one had told him that he was different, strange, weird, etc. It's funny how people like to put others in categories. I guess becoming a shrink was the only way of him trying to make sense of it all, and figuring out what makes people treat other people in the many diverse and novel ways, thus changing the people they categorize in the process. You would be amazed at the powers that labels possess. Tell someone they're weird and strange long enough and they will end up molding themselves to the weirdness and strangeness that others expect of them. It takes a strong personality to let comments and suggestions simply bounce off of them like so much dirt. It's especially hard for someone who is young and more susceptible to labels and comments that are thrown their way. Mark learned a long time ago to ignore the comments because they only meant something if he believed that they meant something. Labels are only as powerful as the acceptance of the ones that they're placed on. They will glue themselves to an impressionable young spirit with the strength of superglue and will influence their growth to a great extent. There are also the strong ones who even from an early age place no significance to the labels others try to stick on them. Mark wasn't one of the strong ones, at least not until much later, when he learned to remove the labels and become something a lot greater than the writing on them. He watched the rain pounding almost horizontally at his study's window, and the thunder served to punctuate his thoughts just at the right moment. A long time ago he remembered being in a room like this, when he was much younger, during a storm much like this one. He had imagined himself in his house safe, with the pounding rain and the wind, not able to go through the field he had created in his mind's eye. The storm had pounded his house all night, and he stayed awake in bed picturing everybody inside his house, safe and protected from his force field, and safe from harm. In the morning when the storm was gone, he went outside to see tree limbs everywhere, and the floodwaters going down like a river in the street. His house was the only one on the block that had suffered no damage and not even a scratch. There were tree limbs everywhere and whole trees on people's roofs. Even the house's yard was litter and debris free. There was a car in a neighbor's pool, and the whole side of one house, including the roof right next to their house, was gone. He didn't tell anyone about the force field, knowing they would laugh at him, but his stepfather was especially cheerful this morning and was actually nice to him as he sat down to breakfast. That seldom happened. His stepfather had made an art of ridiculing and berating his adopted son, mostly out of boredom and because his mother let him. This morning, however, the fact that their house was in one piece, and there were no tree limbs in the yard to be gotten rid of, had given Mark's stepdad something to be happy about. Mark and his mother were very close at one time, but as he grew older, and as his mother grew wise to just what he was capable of, something like fear grew in her, and he became a wedge between them. She knew what he could do, and covered his tracks so his stepfather never found out. There was a time when even Mark himself didn't even have a clue as to what he could do. His mother knew before he did, however. He was only about 5 years old at the time, It was only a year before that when his father was killed by someone who had broken into their house. His room would be neat and everything in its place, and in the morning all his toys, clothes, and books were littering every corner of his room. He would hurry up and put everything in its place and spend a good chunk of time getting his room back together before anyone saw it like that. His mom had witnessed the toys and books and almost got hit by a shoe when she opened the door to see the scene of everything flying as if caught in a tornado, finding herself slamming the door and leaning back against it and crossing herself, mumbling half-forgotten prayers she rarely used anymore. It's a funny thing in man's life, he thought, picking up the hot cup of Earl Grey he had made earlier, and taking a nice long sip of the fragrant brew, enjoying the taste of the oily tea and the melted honey as it slid softly down his throat. He placed it back on the hot plate and listened to the rain and the thunder and the crackling of the flames that all mixed together to create a very moody symphony for a very moody night. He felt tired, as if the world that had for so long rested on his shoulders finally found another set to rest on, and his body didn't know how to handle the release. At an early age, he had become very adept at covering his tracks. At the very beginning, his mother did it for him. When he became old enough to realize what was happening, that's when he started being more careful, becoming quite adept at making his actions seem random and just a matter of coincidence. There were times when he had attracted the attention of the wrong crowd, such as the time he was in Germany and being chased by the local bullies who had centered on him and picked him out simply because he was an American that didn't fit in and butchered their language. They ran after him, cussing him out with choice German words, which he understood but saved his breath and just kept running. Things started happening as they ran through the alleys of Dusseldorf. Flower pots would explode on the ground and once on the head of one of his followers. And somehow the post that held the laundry strung up between two brownstones in the alley came loose to bring down a dozen seats and other clothing right in the face of his assailants. He kept going until he finally lost them, and he would have been happy if that had been the end of it. The end, however, culminated during another chase, with this time the same bully that had led the pack that was chasing him last time lying dead in 2 pieces, having been cut in half by stumbling into the path of the express train on its way to Berlin. The irony of the whole thing was that his powers had nothing to do with that accident, and that it was simply that, an accident. That was the one good thing about all the moving he did, never mind the fact that his friends and connections were practically non-existent. Just when the rumors began to fly about him, his stepdad was ordered to Japan, and that was the end of that. Mark always suspected his mother was scared of him and what he was capable of doing, but never said it to his face. He knew, though. He could see it in her eyes. If only she would realize that she had nothing to be afraid of, and that he could never hurt her no matter what. His stepdad now was another matter. His stepfather fell in love or in lust with his young mother right after his real dad was killed, and to him the 5-year-old brat was just something he'd have to put up with in order to be with Sylvia, his mom. He never actually abused him physically, but there was never a lack of verbal abuse that on occasion would come close to becoming physical, but not quite. The few times when George actually tried to hit or slap Mark were the few times when freaky accidents tended to happen. Things had a habit of standing up for Mark, and after a while it dawned through even George's thick skull that there might be a connection there. After that, George wisely avoided direct confrontations with him and kept the verbal abuse to a minimum. It might have been the one thing that saved his life, although he didn't know that at the time. Mark was a pretty nice guy, but even nice guys have a breaking point. George had wisely backed off before he had found Mark's. The hurricane was starting to sound nasty, and Mark, without even thinking about it, intensified the field around his beach house as he heard things slamming on top of the roof to be simply deflected off by the energy that hardly taxed him to maintain. He knew staying when everyone else had left was pretty insane, but he also knew that he had nothing to worry about, something which his neighbors didn't. There was something about storms that he had always enjoyed. He had never been frightened of thunder or lightning like most kids would be, and a rainy day stuck inside the house to him was a day of joy. That right there by itself would classify him as weird and strange, and he knew that not everyone had his weird tastes. Reruns of the Addams Family from the 60s were always one of his favorite pastimes, and he smiled thinking how much he identified with the wacky family and their unusual tastes. The force and the pure, clean elemental power of a storm always cheered him up, and he knew part of the reason was that he had nothing to fear. Had he wanted to, he could have extended his umbrella of protection to the whole neighborhood, and he suspected he might have done for the whole city if need be. But he wasn't feeling that philanthropic or generous. He'd stick to his own protection and keep it as low-key as possible. He might even go as far as peppering his lawn with some debris so his house would blend in better. He had learned to control his powers while sleeping and not letting them fly free to wreak havoc at his surroundings like he used to when he was little. Relationships were another thing that he shied away from, but being a man with a normal sex drive, he still found time to enjoy the company of women and all the pleasures that they had to offer. He had gotten better at reining in any escaped forces during the throes of passion, but on occasion, a picture might fly off a wall or something might go crashing in the house. He had decided a long time ago not to get serious with anyone in particular, at least not until he could find the right one to share his life and secrets with. So far, he still had to meet her. For someone in his early 40s, Mark had been through quite a lot. One of the reasons he never attracted too much attention to himself was due mostly to his stepfather's gypsy lifestyle, him being an officer in the U.S. Navy, and being stationed to different locations around the world. The various locales and customs and people, however, all combined into giving him a very diverse and unique experience growing up, surrounded by people of different faiths and different beliefs, absorbing the languages and their customs like a very thirsty sponge. He was always a quick learner and proud of his command of about 7 different languages, spoken fluently, one of them being Japanese. Japan was where he had lost his virginity to an older and wiser Japanese geisha at the ripe old age of 15. Having always been the geeky, studious type and a disappointment to his macho, beer-guzzling he-man of a stepfather, it was a birthday present to hopefully help turn him into a man. What losing his virginity accomplished, however, was to intensify the powers inside of himself and to strengthen him in more ways than anyone, including Mark, could have ever imagined. He was still trying to figure out just exactly what had happened. All he knew was that the next day he woke up feeling like he could take on the world. His kinetic power went from being able to form a force field, and a weak one at that, around his house, and being able to lift something as heavy as a bowling ball, to being able to push a car fixing to run you over out of your way as if it was nothing but a toy. That was an experience that he will never forget. He was hiking along a mountain trail, heading back to the base after having spent the night and losing his virginity to a geisha twice his age, and not wanting to wait for the bus to the base, he decided to walk the 15-mile winding mountainside road down to the base at the foot of the mountain. Being plugged into Billy Idol's White Wedding on his portable cassette player, he was happily jogging to the beat as he was coming up to the curve. The pickup truck rounded it at a good clip straight for him. He came within a foot of obliterating him, but at the last second his mind swatted it away as if it was an annoying fly. The driver didn't have a chance. There was no room to do anything but fly off the high cliff to a very loud and very deadly explosion to the rocks far below. Mark ran to the edge and stared. It dawned on him what he just did, and couldn't believe that he had actually done that. Then the realization came that he had just killed someone, and the realization was a hard slap dealt out by reality. Mark was no killer, and if he could have taken back what had just happened, he would have gladly done it. He looked around for witnesses, but there weren't any. The trees stretching in every direction, and the river far below, the rocks were what used to be a pickup truck, now burned in an inferno that no one was there to witness except for Mark. He found himself running down the steep incline to see if by some miracle the driver had survived, and all of a sudden he felt himself falling. Immediately his fall stopped, and he hovered there, almost horizontal with a steep decline. He had never levitated himself before, and slowly he pictured himself at the base of the cliff, next to the inferno, and he found himself flying down and gently set next to it. He didn't have time to be amazed at his accomplishment, and he lifted the burning mass with his mind, and gently brought it down inside the cold river water, which extinguished the flames with a huge cloud of steam escaping. He then placed it back where it had been, but not before turning it around to inspect the still smoking insides. All that was left of the driver was a blackened, twisted, charred, and stinking mass that just a few minutes before had been a living, breathing human, on his way to home or family, or maybe to get a drink. He didn't see anyone else in the truck. He sat down on the rock next to his feet and cried like he hadn't cried in a long time. It was when he heard the sirens and saw the flashing lights far above that he snapped out of it and quickly hid in the trees next to him. He left quickly before the help had found their way down to him, and he managed to find his way back up to the road quite a ways further down the river. It was an incident that forever changed his attitude about his power and sobered him up as to the danger and the great responsibility he had as to its use and abuse. Just being off guard and caught unawares had taken someone's life away, which was something he could never undo. His only consolation was the fact that it wasn't intentional and that the man probably met his end very quickly. It took him a while to get rid of the burning, smoking image of what used to be a man inside the truck out of his head. And his dreams were so intense, some of his ability leaked through to again create havoc in his room, which was something that he hadn't done for a long time now. It could best be compared to peeing in bed. He thought he had outgrown it until the feeling got too intense to control. After his run down the steep incline and realizing he could use his ability in order to levitate, he started experimenting. First chance he got, he went out to the country to be away from prying eyes. He found a great spot, secluded and surrounded by bamboo, not too far from a rice field. He had come out here with some Japanese friends from school a couple of times, knowing one of them whose father owned the rice fields in the area. He lied and said he was sick and managed to get out of going to the base school, which made for a great opportunity for experimentation. Knowing he could do the levitation helped a lot in encouraging him to go through with testing the limits of just what he was capable of. A few years ago he would have shied from something like this, but losing his virginity had not only boosted his powers, but his confidence in himself and his abilities as well. He had always been a big comic book buff and had quite a collection going. Finding himself enabled with the power to move things with his mind removed the comic world of superheroes and incredible powers from the realm of the imaginary and what if to the realm of reality in 3 dimensions. He was feeling great about the whole decision to try to understand and perfect his ability, and finding himself in the perfect spot to try, he took down his backpack and took out an energy bar and a bottle of water. That was his breakfast, and he wanted to try this with something in his stomach. Breakfast never was his favorite meal, and he usually waited for lunch before satisfying his hunger. The bamboo forest was all around him in all its slim beauty, the quiet whisper of the insects, occasional song of the birds, watching him with curiosity. It was a nice day, not too cold and not too hot, but just about right in the mid-70s, promising to be rain-free. He started by first making the clearing he was in a little larger. He turned on his heel and held his arms out, imagining that he was touching the bamboo stalks. As he swiveled, the stalks 10 feet away from him all bent down and broke in every direction. He decided to do a slow float to see if he could go as high as the tall bamboo and pick over their tops to the rice fields beyond. He sat cross-legged on the ground and mentally pushed against the ground beneath him. He felt himself rising, but faster than he wanted. He relaxed the push and found himself about 10 feet off the ground. He uncrossed his legs and just hovered there, feeling strangely exhilarated about the whole process. The feeling of power made him giddy, and he started experimenting with motion, willing himself to move horizontally, which he did again a bit faster than he wanted, and slowed himself down, this time quicker. He was starting to get the hang of how hard to push to move in the desired direction, and this time he decided to slowly rise to look over the top of the bamboo and check for any unwanted visitors. He slowly rose, and this time his speed was a lot better controlled, and he smiled mentally, congratulating himself as he floated there 15 feet off the ground, and slowly turning his body around in mid-air to observe the view from all directions. He had nothing to fear, and he was alone, as he could see for miles around. The bamboo was spaced out enough to where he could tell that no one was inside the forest either. He found himself thirsty for some more water and slowly sunk to the ground next to his backpack. He grabbed the bottle and laid it at his progress and downed half of it in one long swallow. He eagerly went back for more, and this time he wanted to see what limits, if any, were on his height and speed. Luckily at 15 he had traveled and seen a lot of different countries, and fear of heights was never one of his problems. He also wanted to test the speed of his ascent, but first things first. He wanted to test the height and slowly started rising. He thought about being seen if he was rising slowly and decided to go a bit faster. However, the bit faster part was a bit faster than he realized, and he shot up like an arrow that luckily went through a low cloud bank, and he stopped his ascent, now completely hidden inside the clouds. His heart was beating fast as the ride that rivaled that of any amusement park he had ever been to, and being an adrenaline junkie who would patiently wait for hours if need be to get on the latest and greatest ride, he simply laughed out loud, a couple of thousand feet off the ground, floating amidst the clouds, which gave him the feeling as if he was inside a very foggy street somewhere. He slowly turned his body horizontal and headed for the border of the cloud to get his bearings on his location. He was finally close to the edge of the fog bank, and he peered outside to the rice fields and bamboo forest far below him. He was high enough to see the geometric patterns of the surrounding farms and forests, and the city in the distance to the west. He found he was exerting no pressure whatsoever, and the whole task of just floating there was something he felt he could do indefinitely. He was hoping his feelings were right, because it was one hell of a long fall to a smashing end far below if he was wrong. A formation of cranes went by him, and he laughed at his location and the whole intoxicating reality of floating like a bird inside the clouds. He figured since he had made it this far, he might as well try the speed factor. He started slowly at first, but then accelerated at a dizzying ascent that lost the cloud bank and found a more permanent one high above, which spread out beneath him as far as the eye could see. Now he was at an altitude where jets usually called home, and he spotted one not too far to his right. He sunk down to the clouds below, just in case he was visible, but he had nothing to worry about. He was too far for anyone on board to have noticed him. He thought of the Twilight Zone episode with a gargoyle on the wing, and a young William Shatner trying to convince everybody of the fact and he laughed. He noticed another thing, which was the fact that he was having a hard time breathing, and then realized that the air up here was a lot thinner. He was also starting to shiver, feeling the colder air at the higher altitude. He thought about the pressure and decided to slowly descend to the cloud bank below this one, feeling his ears pop. He made it with no problems, and he looked around once more safely inside the anonymity of the clouds to see if anyone had witnessed the affair. Deciding he was safe, he once more descended to the bamboo forest, this time more confident, a lot quicker, and stopping himself a couple of feet, sort of smashing into the ground next to his backpack. He did it, he thought, laughing out loud, giddy with the endless possibilities of being able to fly like a bird. He thought about the implications of not only having the power to swat a truck out of his way, but to be able to fly like Superman, and the whole thing was just too fantastic and very overwhelming. He felt giddy as if he was drunk, and he needed to just relax for a while and take a deep breath before doing anything else, and come back to Earth not just physically but mentally as well. All this simply because he lost his virginity? He thought he should get laid more often. Maybe it was the pent-up frustrated feelings and all the sexual tension that had been bottling up his true powers, and not allowing his inner being to focus fully on the matters at hand. It was a feeling like none other. He had become a man not just in the physical sense with a woman, but in the whole metaphysical sense as well. He remembered reading a sci-fi book a long time ago about someone who had special powers, only to lose them along with his virginity. Apparently real life worked the opposite, because that definitely wasn't the case with him. He got up and stretched and looked at his watch. Shit, I've got to get back to the house before George shows up and finds me missing, he thought. His mom was at her job working at the local pastry shop on base. He thought about it and smiled. Why not? He said as he put his backpack on and shot up like a missile in the sky. He managed to find the same cloud bank, and this time, more confident, he thought of himself traveling horizontally towards the base. His speed increased, and he realized it was a pretty big risk and a chance of maybe getting picked up on radar. So he found a good spot to fall down to quickly this time, and halting at the last second like he did earlier. If he was planning on keeping this under the radar, he smiled at his own pun. He would have to plan things out and not risk exposure. The more he did it, the better he controlled it, and he made a promise to himself to spend any free time finding ideal spots for practice. He started wondering just how far he could travel and how fast, and he told himself he'd try a trip to a neighboring city next time. Mark got up and decided to make another cup. He felt removed from the world and isolated at his beach house, surrounded by a pounding hurricane, and started thinking about Maria and how much he missed her beautiful smile and being able to share all his secrets with. It seemed so long ago since he had last seen her, and almost 10 years to the date. They had packed and done so much in the 15 years that they were married, and the memories he had finally recovered of those times were priceless. He was enjoying revisiting his past and just thinking about all the things that led him to this present moment in time. And as far as doing it all over again, he had no regrets and no children left behind to complicate matters. He sat back down and picked up his fresh cup and got back in his time machine. He had been toying with the idea for a long time now. And turning 15 was a turning point in his young life in more ways than one. He lost his virginity, and along with that, a lot of the things that were holding him back. He relished the idea of running away and making it on his own, and knew he would have no regrets by doing so. As far as leaving his mom went, he knew that she would get over it probably more quickly than he thought. She would probably be relieved, if anything. As far as his stepdad went, that would probably be a blessing for him as well. His added confidence in himself and his abilities were enough to push him to go through with the whole business. He would need money, a destination to head for, and a plan as to what to do once he got there. Mark was honest, but not to a fault. He started thinking about the whole thing, and it was as if the devil on one shoulder finally managed to knock off Mr. Goody Two-Shoes off the other one.